Let me welcome everyone to the legislative session of Swarthmore Borough Council. Let me call the meeting to order. First on our agenda is roll call, and other than Ms. Knapp, who is excused, I see everybody's here. I'm glad to see everybody on this beautiful spring, summer-like day. A lot going on in Swarthmore. The roundabout continues going around and nears completion. We have a primary election day a week from tomorrow. I'd like to encourage everybody to get out and vote at election day. We've got a very full agenda, so I won't tally any further. Next on the agenda is our public hearing on the proposed ordinance amending our regulations relating to signs. You all have a copy of the sign ordinance. This being a public hearing, are there any members of the public have any comments on the sign ordinance? Any members of council wish to be heard? Anyone at all? Hearing no input, I declare the public hearing closed. Next, this being our legislative session, we have one opportunity for public comment. Any members of the public have any comment to offer Borough Council? If so, please come up to the microphone, give us your name and address, and let us hear what you have to say.
Evening, Council. Rick Lee, 305 Chestnut Avenue. Have a question in regards to the orange signs that have been up throughout the borough since the end of November, beginning December, stating that Chester Road is closed and follow the detours. According to our alerts for the fire company, this road was closed for approximately 6 or 7 hours on 6 different days and is now going on to 6 months of anybody driving through town thinking that it's closed. Follow the detours. Most construction sites you go through, if it is not an active work zone, the signs are covered. When they work, they uncover the signs. 6 days over 6 months is a little excessive, and just actually this week on Next Door Neighbor, I noticed that some people were starting to complain about that as well. I don't know what the borough can do about this, but it is very disconcerting when you drive down the road to think that the road is closed. If you're from out of town, you know, you're like, oh geez, how am I going to get around? 6, 7 days out of 6 months is a little.
Well, I just appreciate the comment. Jane, can you enlighten
Yeah, we've
us?
been in touch. Some of the signs are for the college project, and some of the signs are for Aqua. None of them are.
The Aqua's the ones I'm talking about.
Right,
so.
and we've been in contact with Aqua, and the signs cannot be removed because there are still closures on 320, sometimes south of Swarthmore. In fact, they just had it closed last
Well,
week.
it states Strathhaven and Mount Holyoke, so that's...
No, 320 has been closed.
No, the sign
goes on in
state,
Springfield,
that's what I'm
right.
saying, the sign state Strathhaven and Mount Holyoke, and that's just, you know, the signs are
But they
misleading.
they can't remove them or cover them until PennDOT gives them the word that the job is done, which hopefully will be in a couple weeks.
You know, PennDOT requires everyone to cover their signs on the turnpike and other roads when the construction is not going on, so that it's not misleading to the general public. I find that PennDOT not, you know, requiring them to cover the signs during the 6-month process is a little bit disturbing.
Sounds, yeah.
Any other public comment? Hearing no other public comment. Next, let's consider the meeting minutes for our past 2 meetings. You've received by email drafts of our minutes for our meetings of May 4th and our last legislative session on April 13th. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So motion. Second.
Any questions, comments, or corrections?
I do have a correction. In the May 4th minutes, the council, the public forum for open space is at 6 o'clock, not 7 o'clock. I don't think people knew that at the time.
You are correct.
Yes, well, of course.
Thank you.
Okay.
2 points for Gryffindor.
With that correction, any other comments? Corrections? All in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
The minutes are approved.
Thank you.
Lauren, environment.
Sure. I want to announce the public forum on open space, which is at 6 o'clock on May 27th. It's a Wednesday, I believe. And it's at Wallingford Elementary School. And I encourage anyone to come who is interested in the outdoors at all. I think that's everyone. So I'm definitely going to be there. This is part of Corpus. And I think it's going to be important and a good thing to do. Now, is it time for me to move that we advertise the bamboo ordinance?
Yes, it is.
Okay, I move that we advertise the bamboo ordinance.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right. Any discussion? Any comments? You all have a copy, and we've discussed the bamboo ordinance several times at prior meetings. All right, seeing no questions, all in favor of authorizing the advertising of the bamboo ordinance, please say aye.
Aye.
Advertising is authorized. And Bob, could you just remind us of the schedule? We have to advertise it twice, is that
No,
right?
only zoning ordinances you have to do twice, so, because it's not a zoning ordinance, only one time, 7 days in advance of the ordinance.
You would think by now I would know this.
I need to remind
I
myself.
sometimes still look it up, 25 years I look it up, and the rule hasn't changed.
So at our June meeting, we could vote the ordinance into effect.
And is that something you're going to put in the
Yeah.
Swarthmore? That's all. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Michael, Finance.
Yes, thanks, Ralph.
You want to take the microphone? I know we're doing our very best to have legible and audible broadcast and web streaming. So if we'd all speak into the mics, it would help.
Absolutely. Okay, so first let's start with the financial report for April. I don't have any big comments to make. We are a little bit light in revenue and a little bit ahead in expense, but again, it's through 4 months. I think it's something to watch closely. As you look through the individual items, there's really nothing that jumps out that's out of whack. I think it's partially just timing, but I think again, it's something we should monitor as we go forward. And the cash balance as of 4/30/2015 was $2,445,504. Moving on to the, well, first of all, any questions? Moving on to the wire transactions, I'd like to make a motion to approve wire transactions totaling $44,649.14. And I always forget if I can include the transactions to ratify within that
You
motion.
can do the whole thing as an omnibus,
Oh,
including
okay.
the bills to pay.
And so transactions to ratify of $259.92 for a vacuum cleaner, and bills to pay of $125,389.66.
Is there a second?
There is, second.
Any questions or comments about these various financial transactions?
I'd actually like to make one comment of my own things. It was brought up earlier, Jane, and I don't know if this is possible, but within the actual invoice portion of the report, is it possible to put in a very short description? Is that something that's
I don't think you can put in any more than
none?
this, but I will find out.
Okay, because
I feel like maybe there.
even if it's very brief, I think it would be very helpful for.
It's all about what the program allows, because this is generated from the actual check register.
Right.
So, we'll see what.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments? We all received the detailed listing of checks and other items, and it's our obligation to make sure we're comfortable with them before we approve them. All right, all in favor of authorizing the checks and the wire transfers and the other transactions to ratify, please say aye.
Aye.
The transactions are approved.
That is it.
General government, David.
I have two short items of note that were follow-ups from last month, or last week, last Monday. One was I had reached out to Marty to see what potential quantity of merchant parking passes might be needed, if that was a direction we ended up going in as part of our ongoing parking discussion. I haven't heard back from him yet, but that's one kind of open item that I have. And I also met with Jan from the college, Jane, and you and I haven't talked yet. But I think it's a simpler item than what we initially discussed, and I think we've vetted it back and forth in conversation. Since the Town Center West project has begun, there'll be a new road on that side of the street, or a more pronounced road with things on the road. So they have gone to the trouble of getting the addresses, 2, 4, 6, and I think they skip 8 and then move to 10 for the, I think the, counting the train station is 2.
Train station's 2 South Chester Road.
So then, bookstore in, restaurant, thank you, where the other 3 addresses. And they didn't want to formally change it, it would still be a Chester Road address, but they were looking for a Station Square West post with a sign at some point in time in the near future.
And they want to change Station Square to Station Square East.
We already did that, as it turns out.
Does it already say that?
It's signed that way, yeah.
Right.
So that was.
I think they bought that sign, that's right. I remember that.
So it's similar, and I guess for everyone's edifice. There are roads in town that are a few roads that are designated one thing but named another. So Henderson Way is a good example, where it's named, it's officially one thing, but then you put another sign on it. In some towns, these proliferate. I don't think we have too many, but that's what they're interested in, and we'll pursue it. And I don't think there's any objections. That's the reason I brought it to Borough Council.
So nothing, just a discussion item, but nothing for approval today?
No, nothing for approval. No meeting this month for general government. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you. Let me go back and ask, is environment going to meet this month?
I don't think so.
And finance?
No.
Okay. We're going to skip over planning and zoning for the time being. David, public safety?
Right, thanks, Ralph. I don't have anything up for approval this evening. Obviously, the public's interest in parking in the borough, and I think council's interest as well, continues, I won't say unabated, but with some intensity. So we're not going to have a public safety committee meeting this month, May, but we will have one in June. That's Tuesday, June 16th at 7:30 p.m. right here in the council room. And by that point, I'm hoping we will have accumulated more data than we currently have, and we also will have had more experience with passport parking, the mobile payment platform. We'll have more data and more experience with how people are actually using the newly designated parking spots in town. And I hope we'll have a good discussion at that June meeting of the parking situation. Remember when we passed the resolution with the changes that are currently in place, we noted that because we can now do this by resolution, that we have a lot more flexibility than we used to have. So that's something we want to keep in mind as we go forward, and that's all that I have.
All right, thanks very much. And I just want to thank you and the Public Safety Committee for all the hard work that you've put in over, it's more than the past year in, I was going to say fine-tuning our parking, but it's more than that. It's really very carefully studying it and balancing what are some very difficult competing interests, bringing us up to modern technology, and I think we've launched all those things, and the process continues because those members of the public who have some feedback, there's a meeting on June 16th. We'd like to hear your positive feedback if you have it, and if you have suggestions, we welcome those as well.
Can I just ask the chief, do you know how many people ended up using Passport today? 2. So 2 used it anymore.
And there's some flyers, and one
Used
is
it last week?
I think I was both of them.
No. These were in the morning. These were 12 hours in the
No, I
morning.
know my wife
Yeah, it worked.
for 12 hours.
Good.
They're sending us some flyers. We'll probably put some flyers on the cars as well.
All right, next, Public Works, Parks, and Recreation.
Thank you. I won't repeat here the entire discussion, or even much of the discussion that I had last week about the items that appear on the agenda for action tonight under this heading. I move council to authorize advertisement for bids for the 2015 street paving program.
I'll second that.
Any questions, comments? All in favor of authorizing paving bid advertising, please say aye.
Aye.
The advertising is approved.
I move that council authorize application for the 2015 county aid, which, once the motion is seconded, Jane might more fully describe what it involves.
I'll second that.
Jane?
The Pennsylvania, in addition to giving the borough money through the motor vehicle fuels tax, gives money to every county, and Delaware County Pennsylvania, the PennDOT distributes money from the motor vehicle fuel tax to every municipality in the Commonwealth, as well as to every county. And Delaware County chooses to share some of that with its municipalities. And we simply have to submit a form after it's been resolved by Borough Council to do so, and we will be given the money at the completion of our road paving project. It's about $8,000.
So the vote is essentially, should we submit a form and get some money? All in favor of that, please say aye.
Aye.
Authorization's approved.
I like to think of my committee as a profit center for the court. Next, I move that council authorize advertising for bids for the 2015 sanitary sewer rehabilitation program, as more fully discussed last week.
I'll second that.
Questions, discussion? All in favor of advertising the sewer bids, please say aye.
Aye.
Advertising's approved.
I move council authorize the advertisement of an ordinance regulating the use of borough parks, which we discussed last week. One change from the form in which it existed last week, that the authority to authorize for-profit activities or money-making activities in parks on behalf of nonprofit organizations is lodged now in the borough manager rather than as in the prior draft in borough council.
Is there a second?
Sure.
Any questions, comments, discussion? All right, all those in favor of advertising the ordinance in the form circulated to you by email concerning use of borough parks, please say aye.
Aye.
Advertising is approved.
I move that council authorize advertisement of an ordinance updating the borough's floodplain regulations as more fully discussed last week and reflected in the minutes of last week's meeting.
Second.
Any questions, comments? David, this is essentially the required ordinance that we must have in order to have residents.
To enable our residents to participate in the National Flood Insurance Program.
Seeing no questions, all in favor of advertising the floodplain ordinance, please say aye.
Aye.
Advertising is approved.
Finally, though, but last week I discussed a situation involving bamboo in Little Crump Creek Park, and there's discussions that brought more attention to it. And I simply suggest that, absent objection, that I will talk to the borough foreman, public works foreman, to look to implementing a program for the removal and treatment of that bamboo, working, at least in notifying in advance, the adjacent property owner of the method to be employed in removing the bamboo and what herbicide or chemical would be used for the purpose. Understanding that a small portion of this bamboo is, in fact, on the adjoining property to the park, but the 90% plus of it is on parkland. So I simply wanted to give people a chance to raise a question about it if they had it. Otherwise, trees are removed in the park periodically without approval of Borough Council, and bamboo is being handled, will be handled in a similar manner.
One question, David.
Yes.
As to the method of removal, I think last week you mentioned there's some kind of equipment that can dig up the rhizomes or whatever they're called that are running underneath the ground. It's kind of a mechanical or physical method of removal. Is that what you're thinking of? Or?
Yes. Although, and I need to talk to Cuzzy a bit more about he has a $1,200 bid to do this job, do it and place what remains in a truck that can be taken to the county incinerator. I will talk to him a bit more, but my understanding is that the advantage of this process when using the equipment, there's such a thing as a bush hog. I don't know if this is a bush hog, but a piece of equipment that will at the same time cut the bamboo stalks themselves, but also pull the roots out of the ground. And it will all, with the same process, shaking loose from the roots the dirt that exists, and placing them in a borough truck that will be hauled off to the county incinerator. I do not believe that process obviates the need to use herbicide or otherwise to continue to treat the area to make sure that it's eradicated.
Okay, I guess I would just make it's nothing more than a plea that, and maybe it goes without saying that the minimum amount of herbicide needed, to do the job be used. And I don't know whether we meaning the borough have any control over that at all.
But we do. We have total control over it because it will be done by us. One of our Public Works crew members is authorized and licensed by the state to do this exact thing.
Okay.
Also, the Public Works foreman has been in discussions with Jeff Jabko from the college, who has a lot of experience in this. And so we will approach it. And I personally want to not use a spray can, but particularly because of we'll be also going on somebody else's property, want to become involved in letting being assured about what's being done, but letting the adjacent property owner know what's being done. I have, and I should note that there's an account for professional park maintenance that in the budget of $4,000. To date, $2,190 of that has been spent for other purposes, but the balance would be available for this purpose. I don't believe we will meet in May. June, perhaps, when we begin to know more about the paving contract, etc. But we will not meet in May. I have no further report.
All right, thank you, David. Let me go back to planning and zoning. There are two items. Let's first consider the sign ordinance. And I guess in Elizabeth's absence, I'll present it unless there's some other member of planning and zoning who was. Don't mean to usurp. Please go ahead.
I can, but I guess I have a question. Technically, is the public hearing? I wasn't sure about the order.
I think the public hearing is a procedural step that we have to take before we vote on it, and so this agenda item is the actual vote on the ordinance. Okay. So I guess I would make a motion to approve, although we don't have ordinance number blank. It says here. I guess
1068.
1068.
Sorry about that.
Ordinance number 1060, I'd like to make a motion to approve ordinance number 1068 as it relates to the new sign ordinance. Taking questions.
Second that motion.
Okay. Any?
I can just make a very brief comment that the sign ordinance does actually quite a number of things. Some of which actually might be perceived as a lot of more signage because we have some bigger buildings than we used to in town. And we used to basically allow 1 12 square foot sign on a building frontage. And both the co-op and the new inn have a little more frontage in that. So the sign allows a little bit more signage in those. But then address some issues with signs that were of concern to people, signs that seemed to have too much stuff on them, signs that were placed in inappropriate locations on buildings, a little bit of concern on the planning commission about twinkling, blinking signs. So there was actually a lot that ended up sort of cleaned up in this ordinance. That the sign ordinance hadn't really had a major revision in some years, and there's actually been some change in town since then. So it was sort of ended up a little bit all over the place, but I think in a good way. Many thanks to the Planning Commission and Elizabeth for shepherding it through. It was pretty complicated.
And I guess we've all discussed it and heard about it at a few separate meetings, but there were a great many meetings of Planning and Zoning Committee and Planning Commission at which the details were also discussed. Were there some comments?
I just have one question, Jane. Is it something we see the borough actively policing, or is it a complaint-based?
Signs?
You need a permit.
You need a permit, so we're pretty aware, and very few people put up signs without.
But as it's very thorough. As it's stated, is there anything in violation today once we pass the
You
ordinance?
can't, anything,
So we're going to grandfather anything that we don't like?
Right. Right.
Well, we don't have.
It's already up. It's already up.
So we're also grandfathering things you might like, so
Understood.
there's
No,
that.
that
So
did come
yes,
out correct.
everything is grandfathered, it will only apply to new
Then
signs.
there's, okay, thank you.
Nothing's ever grandmothered.
Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, the motion is to approve the new sign ordinance that's been distributed to all of you. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
The new sign ordinance is adopted. Next on the agenda is consideration of a resolution approving the college's land development plan for a pavilion and courtyard, as I call it, near the tennis courts. I think we were all here last week when the college made, I thought, a very interesting presentation about that pavilion, primarily restroom facilities, but of note, the green character of it. I guess there'll be a green roof, there'll be use of runoff water for some purposes, and
Most important.
of most interest to some, if not all of those at this table. And I think Rick Brown made a very interesting presentation, and the architect was here as well. As you may recall, there were half a dozen waivers that the college was requesting, most of them in the nature of procedural waivers for things that didn't seem to really be germane. For example, ordinarily we require a formal meets and bounds of the tract here, since the site is located over 1,000 feet from any tract boundary. It didn't seem necessary to insist on that. There are 7 waivers that are attached to this approval resolution. Other than the steep slope issue, none of them seem to be substantive, and that one seems to be an improvement over the status quo, which is a sort of a crumbling embankment. So I offer those observations, but I guess before I offer them, I should have called for a motion. Do we have a motion to approve this?
Yeah.
All right. Can I have a motion to approve this resolution granting land development plan approval?
Second.
Okay.
Who was that? David.
One of the days.
David and David. Any other discussion, comments, questions? And I think it's terrific that the college is so focused on green and sustainable building when they build in the borough. So with that, by way of comment, and we're prepared to vote. David, did you have a recusal that you wanted to put on the record?
Yeah, Ralph. Due to the fact that my wife is on the faculty of Swarthmore College, I feel I should recuse myself from voting on this.
Okay, so noted. With that, all in favor of approving of granting preliminary and final land development plan approval for the proposed pavilion and courtyard at the college, please say aye.
Aye.
Approval is granted. Next on the agenda, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Ralph. I wanted to bring people up to date on the fun fair that we just had. Last week I mentioned it, but this week I have some statistics. Over 70 charities took place. As you know, it was a beautiful day and it was packed with people. The Rotary estimates that roughly $50,000 was raised for charities that day, which is a pretty tidy sum. And some of the recipients of the charity, there's the Chester Charter School, CADES and ABC for our locals, and then the international Rotary stuff, including water issues, polio, and care boxes for Nepal. So I thought that was a pretty good day and a nice day in Swarthmore. Even though there were very few Borough Council people marching in the parade. But to get in there.
In spirit.
Yeah, you said that last week.
I did say that last week. It's funny. And the other thing too is, in my discussions with people in town, it's no surprise that parking is a big thing that I keep hearing again and again. And last week I brought up a couple things which I thought were relatively low-hanging fruit that we could pursue. I know the forum for this should be David's committee, but in light that they're not going to meet this month, I wonder if we could maybe circulate these, to tweak these kinds of things, and maybe be able to discuss them in our June meeting. I think with the anticipated construction in July in the borough parking lot, obviously we're very much looking forward to the roundabout being finished, which I understand should be weeks away at this point. At least that's what I'm told. So I think that's something that I'm hoping that Borough Council could consider for our next meeting. And that's all I have.
And those issues would be the overnight
Issue is overnight parking for residents who live in town center. Right now they are asked, with their permit, they're asked to park in the 12-hour parking areas. I was suggesting that maybe there were other places where they could park in town that would be closer to where their apartments are, with the understanding that they still would need to move their cars at 8 o'clock in the morning when the parking, on days when the parking was enforced. We discussed that there were issues revolving around some overnight deliveries that happened. Generally, that seems to be for Charlie's hardware store and maybe for Dunkin' Donuts, but that's about, those would be too many from that, I think. And we did discuss this with the chief and with the police. And the second issue was about some sort of consideration for merchant parking during the day when the meters are enforced. Right now there's a permit that they can buy which would allow them to park again in the 12-hour spots, which are remote and also sort of most often filled by commuters, as we've seen in sort of the statistics that we're looking at. And so my request was whether we would consider possibly the 4-hour and possibly the 2-hour spots that are on Myers Avenue as appropriate locations where merchants might be able to park with that particular pass.
So I guess the question is whether at our June sessions there might be some proposal along those lines ready to vote on, but certainly something for all of us to think about. Just by way of informal observation, I think Jane may have some input on this as well, but I noticed a couple of evenings there seemed to be about a dozen cars parked overnight, of which maybe half seem to be parked there during the day
Right.
as well. So maybe we're really only talking about 6 overnight parking spots of cars that are out there by.
Well, there's also, I think there's a lot of people who are parking in the neighborhoods, which are relatively closer to where their apartments are than they overnight. And maybe if we had something else for them, that might alleviate some of the pressure on some of the side streets that are around town as well.
I mean, the other one quick point is there's a supply-demand question, which is technically there's lots of people who are eligible to do this, but since it's so far away, maybe they've decided they don't want to pursue that option. If you make it closer, maybe they'll want to pursue it, and therefore the demand increases.
It's true that it came up because there were a lot of these people parked right on Station Square East, I guess it's, or West on the other side. When the roundabout construction all happened, all those spaces. That was kind of the discussion that happened in some of the public forums we had about it.
I was trying to say it's right or wrong. It just could be that if we made it closer, then there could be more demand, and therefore create some other problem.
But even now, if you're a resident, you can prove you're a resident, we'll give you a sticker to do it. It's not like it's, and we all walk around town at night and see all these places empty, so it's not hard. I don't know, I understand your point.
All right, well I would urge all members of council to think about these issues and make your own observations about the parking situation, and we can discuss it at our work session next month, and if there seems to be some consensus for action.
I assume by then we'll have at least a month's worth of statistics available from Passport as to what meters are being used when and for how long, that might help inform our decision.
And of course, in any event, there's going to be the more formal June meeting of public safety, where any and all parking issues will be under consideration. So,
Okay, thank you, Ralph.
So I'd encourage everyone to think about it between now and our next meeting.
Thanks.
All right, thank you. Jane, anything from the
Just a
borough
couple
manager?
things. Under the public works report, I'm reminded when I see the violation notices that the code enforcement officer actually started last week, sweeping the borough, looking for overgrown vegetation and sidewalks in need of repair. How many, did you send out the first batch, 30, something like that? Yeah, so we'll probably put a notice in the Swarthmore, but the notice is generally more effective than anything in the Swarthmore.
Jane, if I could just ask a question. Are these citations for violations or merely notices that people have to?
They're called correction notices. They have a date that we'll go back, and then we can send a non-traffic citation if there's a problem. Normally, we just send them a second notice.
So for anyone listening at home or reading the paper, we're not sending out citations without ample warning. We are just making note of conditions that can be potentially dangerous and asking people to, with reasonable dispatch, deal with it.
Correct. Under the meetings attended on the manager's report, you'll see a couple of aging in place. One is a task force and then a forum. All the subcommittees of aging in place have been holding forums. So far, there's been one on social engagement and another one on transportation. And there'll be 2 more coming up. One is on housing issues, more how to retrofit your house, make it so you can stay living there, and another one is more on zoning issues. So I don't know the exact dates now. I'll send them out. But they've had some great speakers. Attendance has been a little low, but they've been summarizing the accounts. They're on our website, and they'll start synthesizing that information. They found a host of resources available already, and at the very least, this Aging in Place Task Force will start to synthesize some of that, and we can figure out how to make sure it's accessible to people. So, and they are on target to get a draft report to council by the fall. They are bound and determined to not go past the 1-year deadline that was given to them, so they're really moving quite impressively. I attended a meeting today that is actually going to have an impact on every municipality. I don't know if in the Commonwealth, but definitely in southeastern Pennsylvania. An organization named Penn Future, which is an environmental advocacy group, was successful in a little lawsuit with the Department of Environmental Protection that DEP had not been adequately protecting the streams from stormwater runoff. So in the past, you've heard me talk about our MS4 program, that's Municipal Separate Storm Sewer, and various measures that we've taken to make sure our streams are in good shape, locally practicing good practices, making sure our stormwater management ordinance is adhered to. And Penn Future was successful in the suit, basically saying it wasn't enough and the streams were still impaired. And basically every stream in southeastern Pennsylvania is impaired. So we will now be moving to something called pollutant reduction plans, which means we will have to have a 5% reduction within 5 years of our next permit in the impairments in our streams. And those impairments include sedimentation, and organics and PCBs. Sediment, right. Every single stream is impaired with sedimentation, which comes mostly, interestingly enough, not from things in the street getting into the storm sewer, but the volume of water getting in through the storm sewer system into the creek. So it's the velocity and the volume of water is causing erosion, and it's the erosion that causes the sedimentation. So it's all, again, about keeping water out of the storm sewers as much as possible. Of course, we've been doing that with our really strict stormwater management ordinance, but additional measures will have to be taken. It will mean during budget time, we'll have an estimate from the engineer on how much it will cost to prepare a plan. It's not something a non-engineer could possibly do. Municipalities, almost every municipality was at the meeting today. The county did a great job organizing the meeting and making sure that people went. And we certainly are looking at ways to work together so that we can get some economies of scale and coming up with, you have to file something called a general permit with DEP and perhaps an action plan. If one municipality in the chain fails, unfortunately, we may have to go to something called the TMDL, which is a total maximum daily load, which are much more severe and quantitative measures of reducing pollutants in the streams. And for us, interestingly enough, it's Crum Creek, Little Crum Creek, and the Delaware River. Everybody who's tributary to the Delaware River is responsible for cleaning it up. It's not a bad idea, but it is a somewhat of an onerous, unfunded mandate. There's absolutely no money that came with this.
But they won a lawsuit against the DEP, so there's no money coming from the DEP.
No. Well, because it's a municipal responsibility. DEP simply enforces the Clean Water Act on behalf of EPA.
So, Jane, in terms, you said this was an unfunded mandate, so I understand the unfunded part of it. What's the mandate? The mandate is we will apply for a new general permit, and it will, and in that we will have to prepare a pollutant reduction plan. And in that we will say how we will, what we think our level of pollutant is in the stream. We will quantify that, and then we will have to say what our plan is to reduce it by 5%. So that's what you have to do. So it sounds like you're talking about hiring consultant experts? No, our borough engineer will do it. The borough engineer can do that? Yeah. And the borough engineer also can make the certification. Is that sufficient? Or you need to determine how much pollutant. Yeah, it's a calculation based on, they can determine how much sedimentation you have based on the amount of impervious cover in your town, farmland. It's a little formula. And what, if anything, let's say whatever this means, the findings are somehow not what they should be. What is the borough required to do about that? Well, if you don't meet your goal, then DEP can put you sort of into the next category. Mm-hmm. I don't want to call it a penalty box because it makes it seem as if you're trying to improve the stream, but the penalty is that you have to go into a much more quantitative program to reduce the pollutants in your stream. And so you can no longer be under this general permit. You have to go into an individual permit with DEP with a plan to reduce whatever the pollutant is in your section of the stream. And the plan could theoretically involve the see. So far, I'm hearing a lot about studies and certifications. No. But,
Yeah.
so the plan could involve actually doing something.
Well, then we have to, you can't reduce 5% with a study, you've got to do something. So those somethings could be planting additional riparian buffer. If you lived in a community with a lot of stormwater basins, we have none. But if we had them, you could, and a lot of them just look like big open fields with grass, they wouldn't do a very good job at all. You could convert those to something that was more wooded. That's obviously not a possibility for us. We could, you can take credit for things done on private property. So for instance, the college's plan is fabulous for us. That the college is a terrific partner for us that we will use. They're actually reducing some existing problems with this plan coming up, and their commitment to being green will actually help us. And those are the types of projects that DEP will be looking for.
I was just thinking, all the work that was done in connection with the tunnel, for example, is that the sort of thing that would come? Okay.
Yes, and actually at the meeting today, every manager wanted to know whether they could get credit. We've been doing these MS4 plans for over 10 years now, and we've done a lot of things. And some municipalities have done even more than we have, retrofitting these stormwater basins. And they said, well, can we get credit for what we've done? I will say the answer was vague from DEP. And I think the answer is going to be no. We're dropping the axe as of 2018 is the new permit, which sounds like a long time away, but it takes a year for them to get the permit, so we really have 2 years to get a plan together to submit with the permit application in 2017.
So Jay, there's no baseline though? It's a 5% reduction regardless of what your pollutants are?
You provide your own baseline.
That's answer. It doesn't make any sense.
Greg McGarity has been, from the college, has done a lot of study over time of Little Crump Creek in particular, and would have a lot of data.
There is no data on sedimentation. You can't quantify sedimentation.
I will tell you,
It's
living
quite frustrating.
along Little Crump Creek, when it's in flood, it's brown. And they're all brown, and that's just sedimentation.
Well, at one point I said, okay, I'm back here with the crabby old managers. We want to know how you're measuring sedimentation. And I sort of held up like a beaker jar, like, is this how we're measuring? They said, oh, no, it's nothing like that. You'll tell us what we do and we'll be able to quantify how much of a reduction you have. And it is from a starting point that you tell them. I assume that they can agree, or they being DEP, can agree or disagree with what you say is your starting load. And we do also, again, we have to do this 5% reduction in organics that are in the Delaware River.
This has been coming for some time. Greg McGarry's been warning about this coming for some time.
Well, he's been warning about TMDLs. This is like an intermediate step that caught everybody by surprise.
Jane, I gather that a lot of this is going to be engineering work, but does it make sense to ask the Environment Committee to at least put this on its radar screen to follow the process, or do you think that just asking our engineer to come up with a plan is sufficient?
I think that right now we should start with the engineer. I do think there will be people interested in what the engineer proposes for the borough to do, and we can absolutely use the EAC at that point. I think more as a review and to come up perhaps with additional ideas of how we might be able to get to that 5%.
Well, and we also have that, the project.
Yes, that would be a great project.
Which will help a lot.
Right, you're absolutely
we
right.
get that.
So I think the Environment Committee and the EAC will be a great help. Obviously, our engineer was there today, but there's about 4 engineers who work in the county, and they were all there today, so. And as I say, the other thing is we hope to be working probably with, well, there's 2 things, with CRC, which is the Chester-Ridley-Crum Association, again, trying to organize the groups together. And the other thing that the borough may have to think about is last year, a couple of years ago, the legislature changed the Authorities Act so that we can now create a stormwater authority, just like we have sanitary sewer authorities and trash authorities, and you can charge a fee to residents for stormwater management. Radnor actually already does this. If you go to the Radnor Township website, they have a great explanation of how they charge for their stormwater fee and what they'll do with the money. They charge in increments of $29, so a lot up to 8,000 square feet. It's $29 a year, and then it's basically double that for every additional 8,000 square feet to a maximum of maybe an acre, something like that. So that's something else that again might come up with environment in conjunction with EAC to discuss whether that's something that council wants to do, to raise some money to pay for this work that's going to have to be done.
All right, thank you for that enlightening report. Anything else?
No,
Bob, anything from the
I
solicitor?
have nothing, thank you.
All right, there's no other business to come before council.
I move we adjourn.
Thank you all.